Good morning, everybody. Huge thank you for making the effort to spare some time today. I know how busy everybody is. Just to introduce myself, I'm Jane Colthorpe, the Chief Executive of Community First Yorkshire. I've been in post about a year now. Sometimes it feels longer, sometimes it doesn't feel as long, but I'm sure all of you know how that feels. I'd also like to say a particular welcome to Gary Sainty and Jason Stamp here. Gary is the programme manager, the programme director for the Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, which is the new name, as many of you know, for the Humber Coast and Vale Partnership, which is the ICS structure. There are more acronyms today than you can shake a stick at, and we probably get a prize for acronym bingo, but if you don't get a particular acronym, scribble it down and we'll capture it at the end. It's never easy. Also, huge welcome to Jason Stamp, who is both the chair and the senior responsible officer for the VCSE Collaborative, which is part of the Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, ICS. That just doesn't trip off the tongue quite in the same way. So my apologies for that. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Gary. Gary, over to you.
Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. Jane's done some of the presentation for me, which is handy. I'm the programme director for VCSE programme director, even I got my job title wrong. VCSE Programme Director for Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, and today I'm hopefully going to take you through what the Health and Care Partnership is, what the ICS is, and try and go through all of those acronyms as well as we go through. First of all, we've got a little video. So our Chief Executive Designate of Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership is genuinely interested and would like to have been here today, but for diary clashes can't. So first of all, before I go into my presentation, we've just got a little bit of a few words from Stephen Eames.
Hello, my name's Stephen Eames. I'm the Chief Executive of the Humber and North Yorkshire Integrated Care System. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I really wanted to take this opportunity to outline the importance of the voluntary sector to the success of the integrated care system that we're currently setting up and which goes live on the 1st of July this year. It's important that we have an equal partnership with all of you who are providing voluntary services across our area for two very important reasons. One is the grassroots work that you do day in and day out that will help us to connect to the communities that we serve. And the second really important reason is that we want to understand, the board, the leadership of the ICS, what the lived experience is of the people that we are serving. And in many, many ways, the voluntary sector are much closer to that than any other part of our system. And it'll be really helpful for us in making decisions and determining how we deploy our resources to really understand that around the executive and board table. So the integrated care system has one really simple mission, which is to improve the lives and the outcomes in terms of health and care for the people who live and work across North Yorkshire and across the Humber. And there are four important strategic aims that underpin that. The first one is ensuring people live the longest, healthier, happiest lives that they can. The second one is for us to vigorously tackle the health inequalities that we know are a feature of many parts of our communities, whether we're looking into North Lincolnshire or into Hull or into the coastal regions of North Yorkshire. So we're really focused on that, and we've got a lot to do given the impact of the pandemic over the last couple of years. The third one is to play our part with you in the voluntary sector, with our colleagues in local government, with important community leaders and community groups, with local business, so to tackle the recovery that we need in terms of the social and economic consequences of the pandemic. And then finally, we do have a duty to continue to improve the quality of the care and services that we provide and ensure that we get the best outcome for the taxpayer's pound. So, for the integrated care system to be successful and deliver on those ambitions I've just outlined, we need a very vibrant and strong partnership with the voluntary sector at every level. And of course that starts at place. And the way that we're organised currently is across the 6 places that make up Humber and North Yorkshire, derived from the existing local government boundaries. I know that the VCSE has got very strong roots and strong leadership in all of those areas. So the important thing first is to connect with you there to make sure that you have a strong voice in the place-based committees and services that we're establishing under the aegis of the ICS. We then are providing 4 collaboratives that stretch across the whole geography, and they're focused on acute services, mental health, community and care, and primary care. It's really important as we develop those things that we want to do once across our whole geography in those areas. So, for example, we want to ensure that we have as much as we possibly can a common waiting list, so we can be more efficient about dealing with the long waits that we currently face. The VCS has a big role to play in supporting patients who might be waiting for a long time. So your voice within the collaboratives is really important. And then finally, and we've already done this, we've got a very vibrant voluntary sector strategic group led by Jason Stamp, with colleagues from each of the 6 places working very closely with me and my colleagues. And we've got some very clear strategies. These strategies will influence our integrated care board, our integrated care partnership, and indeed Jason sits on our integrated care board to make sure he's fully involved on your behalf in all the discussions we have. And the big hitting areas there are, again, dealing with health inequalities. How can we really enable the voluntary care sector to be part of the one workforce that we want to create across Humber and North Yorkshire? So I want to make some commitments to you on behalf of the integrated care system and of the integrated care board for Humber and North Yorkshire. Our first commitment is to ensure that at every level of our operation we treat the VCSE as an equal partner. Our second commitment is that we fully engage you, involve you, again at every level, in the planning and design of health and care services right across all of the communities that we serve. Our third commitment is to put you at the heart of our people strategy, this idea of one workforce, wherever that workforce is drawn from. I think you're integral to that. Our fourth commitment is that we will listen carefully to your advice and take your insights to help us to understand as much as we can about the work that you do, but more importantly, the benefits that you bring to the people that we serve, and to help us understand that lived experience that I talked about earlier on. And my last commitment is to ensure that when we think about the allocation of resources, how we spend our money, that we take into account the innovation, the insight and the skills of the voluntary sector, and again make sure that you're fully part of our agenda. So finally, I hope you have a great day, and can I take the opportunity to thank you for everything that you do.
I suppose just covering that, Stephen is genuinely interested and wants to engage with the VCSE sector and sees that very much part and parcel of the health and care partnership moving forward, the integrated care system for the area, and is making sure that he spends some time coming out to various places, connecting with VCSE organisations and understanding not just the place and the people that are in it, but the people that work in it, the organisations that are supporting people outside of our traditional kind of health and care settings as well. So that will take place, and I'm sure over the coming months and years, Stephen will be out and about into various areas as well. So I'm going to go through what the ICS is, so the Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, and like Jane said, if I was here a few months ago, we'd have been talking Humber Coast and Vale Health and Care Partnership. Obviously there's been a brand change, the logo's changed, some of the colours have changed, but ultimately the care partnership is still there doing what it's always done. So integrated care systems are setting up across the country. As it says at the top, it's all about giving people the support they need, where they need it, and it's having that joined up partnership approach. And I'm sure there'll be people sat in the room thinking, we've always done that, what's new? And in some respects, yes, it's a new title, it's a new system, there's a new approach to doing things, but ultimately that partnership working is what we want to continue moving forwards, which takes you into the bullet points on there in terms of an ICS is about new partnerships, where new partnerships are needed, but also making use and utilising the existing partnerships that have been taking place, meeting the needs of people's health and care needs across an area. And I'll come on to the geography that Humber and North Yorkshire covers in just a moment. It's about looking at things with a population health lens and looking at health inequalities and how do we reduce those. And that's looking at them across a system, and I'll come on to what system, place and neighbourhood is in a minute, but health inequalities across a system, but then also looking locally and thinking, well actually, yes there are health inequalities between Grimsby and Harrogate, but actually what are the health inequalities in York, in North Yorkshire, in the various places across North Yorkshire. It's obviously part of the long-term plan for the NHS, and as I've mentioned, the VCSE sector is a crucial part of integrated care systems moving forwards and providing part of that health and care for people. At present, the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, again I'll cover some of these acronyms in a minute, is in shadow form and will formally launch on the 1st of July. So we are getting closer and closer to that date. It was pushed back a little bit as stuff happens in government and all the rest of it. But the 1st of July is the date that all integrated care systems across the country will go live. We're no different, and we're in a very good position, I think, at Humber and North Yorkshire to go live on the 1st of July. And like I say, the board has been operating in shadow form now for a few months, so we're very well set up in this area and we're ready to go as an integrated care system. So that is the weird and wonderful geography that we cover at Humber and North Yorkshire. It's very unique. I think every other system set up around it, and that's the bit that's left, so that's Humber and North Yorkshire. It's unique in the fact that we have large rural swathes such as North Yorkshire, we've got urban communities such as Hull, we've got the likes of Harrogate, the likes of Grimsby, which couldn't be two more different places. We've got a huge coastal line as well, which has its own challenges and deprivation and what have you down the coast. And then around the outside is the vital statistics, if you like, in terms of what makes up that geography, in terms of the partnership and the people that are within it. And the key bit for today, and the key bit certainly from my job as the VCSE Programme Director, which is about joining up the voluntary sector with health and care, is that bottom right statistic. It says thousands. There's around 15,000 VCSE organisations operating across Humber and North Yorkshire. And all of those have got a unique perspective. All of those connect with their beneficiaries, whether that be at a local level around a specific theme, but ultimately they've got a huge value and a huge role to play in the system moving forward. And that's not just delivery, that's about being a strategic partner, which again I will come on to. So, starting off with the system, with the integrated care system, this is the vision for Humber and North Yorkshire. Start well, live well, age well, and then life well. And I'm sure everybody's sat in this room looking at that thinking there's not a lot to argue with there. That's what we want to see across the patch, absolutely. And underneath that, the mission, how we're going to start, approach that, delivering that vision around improving outcomes for people, for organisations, tackling those inequalities, increasing productivity across all of the services that are offered across the ICS, and supporting that broader social and economic development at place, at system level. Okay, so that's where the ICS is positioning and taking its drivers from. Good, that comes up on there. So, boring slide, governance slide. That's the structure of Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership. I I'm going to go on to tell you what all the different blobs are in a minute, but the bits to be aware of is the two circles in the middle, so the Integrated Care Board, ultimately responsible for Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, and the Integrated Care Partnership which sits next to that. And like I say, I will cover those in a minute in terms of what they both mean. My aim today is obviously to say all these new acronyms and bits and pieces, but then hopefully explain what they are. So at the end, if I haven't done that, I haven't done a very good job. On the right hand side, we've got that green block, which is what the collaboratives are across Humber and North Yorkshire. You will see there are 5 on there, and the VCSE sector is 1. So that's the collaborative that I'm the director for. That's the collaborative that Jason chairs as well. And then at the top, you've got the place-based arrangements that we will work through the 6 different places. So the ICS, I'm not going to read these word for word, I'm going to leave them up there. Effectively, the ICS is the whole, it's the system as a whole, the whole geography, all of those organisations, all of those numbers, that is the integrated care system. The ICB is the board level, that's the bit that's got the statutory functions from the NHS. And then at the bottom, the ICP, the Integrated Care Partnership, the other red blob that was on that, which is where that partnership will take place. So that will be bringing partners together from across the system, working at that system level, at that entirety. But that's where your local authorities, statutory partners, the VCSE sector will have a role on that table as well. So we will be getting involved in the Integrated Care Partnership. And just to say as well, we do have a seat on the Integrated Care Board as well, which Jason takes as the chair of the VCSE Collaborative. So the ICB, that's effectively what it's responsible for. Like I say, it's a statutory body. It's got to develop a plan, it's got to allocate resources, look at people, look at the governance, lead on that system-wide approach. A couple of bullet points to pick out from there. It's got to understand place. We don't want a system sat somewhere in Humber and North Yorkshire saying what needs to happen at place level. We ultimately want place to drive what the priorities are, what the challenges are, what the opportunities, bring that forward, and it's up to the system to understand that and then appropriately resource and support that place-based working. And I think the figure that we're talking about is work will take place at system level, of course it will. That's about 20% of the work. Most of the work will take place at place level, so 80% of the work. And the places are those 6 places that we mentioned earlier, so North and North East Lincolnshire, Hull, East Riding, York and North Yorkshire. And we all know that North Yorkshire is huge. It's effectively a place, as we talk about it, a system, but really it's a number of places all coming together to make a place. So we understand that there is work to do in terms of the system and working out actually how do we work through that geography, how do we manage that? Do we need to have multiple networks rather than just one? For the purposes of today, I speak of places of North Yorkshire, but like I said, there is a lot of working to do in terms of actually how does that materialise in the future as well. And ultimately, that's got to be driven by place, not by us saying you need to have X, Y and Z networks. So the role of the ICP, the Integrated Care Partnership, so it is a statutory committee of the ICB, so if you look across the country, there will be integrated care boards set up everywhere, there will be integrated care partnerships set up everywhere. Obviously the bits around that, the collaboratives and what have you, that will look differently depending on where you go in the country, but these 2 bits are the statutory committees that must be in place. And that's about facilitating that joint action, improving those health and care outcomes and experiences for the populations across Humber and North Yorkshire in this instance. It's about supporting those place-based partnerships and bringing together a range of partners, both statutory and non-statutory partners. And like I say, we will have engagement with the ICP when that sets up, probably back end of this year, and we will have multiple VCSE organisations there to represent the sector and to work. But ultimately, again, the work that then takes place on the ground is through you guys and through all the other VCSE organisations as well, so we need to make sure that that connects and we can have that dialogue between the system and the sector. So just to cover off, I suppose, the acronyms, the jargony bits, the committees that are on there. So place-based arrangements, I've mentioned. That's committees coming together at a place, so the 6 places that we've mentioned, where the majority of the work will take place, and those place-based arrangements in all areas are forming at the minute. So it's not a done deal, it's not as if people have missed out. We need to keep an eye on that, and through our network and through our work we will make sure that the VCSE sector is represented on those place-based arrangements as well. And then you've got collaboratives, which I mentioned. The VCSE is one of the collaboratives, is part of the governance. That doesn't take place across all of the country. And when I stand up and speak in other areas, they're always a little bit shocked is the wrong word, can't think of the right word, but they look at us in awe a little bit and think, oh, actually you've got the VCSE sector in the governance for the ICS. It stands us in a really good stead for the sector. And those collaboratives are where organisations will come together beyond a place geography, so the VCSE sector as a whole coming together, speaking with the system in a strategic way. This one it's just a diagram. People like diagrams in terms of how we work. So the various elements of the system, I mentioned that we work at system, place and neighbourhood level. Ultimately, and again I think most people would agree, the work that we do is to benefit our communities, our people that are on the ground. So they're there at the top. That will look very different in different neighbourhoods across Humber and North Yorkshire, let alone across the country. But ultimately, we want to make sure that we have that connection on the ground. We then work through the 6 places, as I've mentioned, and then ultimately we connect to the system. So there is a route from ground level up to system and back down again, and we need to make sure that that's not just a top-down approach and we send messages down and expect them to be read, but actually it's about working together up and down the system and across the places as well, and across the collaboratives, across the different themes. Ultimately we've got to kind of work across the whole system. So this one is how the VCSE collaborative operates. So it mirrors the governance structure. On the right hand side over here is a couple of work streams, or a few work streams that we're involved in, whether we lead on those or we support other areas of the system that lead on those pieces of work. I'm sure that's going to grow and grow. It has done over the last year or so that I've been in post, and it will continue to grow. I've mentioned that we are a collaborative, so we're the circle in the middle, and we've got the other 4 collaboratives on the far side. There will be, and there needs to be, a collaborative of collaboratives of sorts. How do we work with those other collaboratives to make sure the VCSE is connected and we're all working together? And as an example of this, you could take social prescribing and say, where does that sit within the system? Well, it could sit in a queue, it could sit in the community collaborative, it could sit in the VCSE collaborative. Ultimately, we work out where it sits and who's got responsibility for it. If that's with us, we'll lead it. If that's with somebody else, we will support the work that's going on. And then, like I say, we've got those place-based assemblies, which is effectively a network of VCSE organisations at place, which is along the bottom. We're obviously in North Yorkshire today, so hopefully I've got circle in the right place. Obviously the assemblies, like I've mentioned in the other 5 places, dare I say it's a touch easier, because we've got a geography that's fairly neat, and you get a VCSE network. Across North Yorkshire, yes, we've got people here today working as a network, which is great, but actually do we need to break that down? And again, that's work to come in terms of how that looks, how that works, and ultimately is to be decided by you guys at players as well in terms of what works for the sector. Final couple of slides from me, and this is just around the VCSE collaborative. So we've created our own vision, obviously align that to the integrated care system and the priorities that are taking place, but ultimately our VCSE collaborative, which is infrastructure organisations coming together from the 6 different places, representing the sector and speaking to the system. And we feel that the role of that collaborative is really to influence, to collaborate, to enhance the role of the sector and make sure that the system is engaging with VCSE organisations and with the sector. It's about being transformational, and it's about being that key strategic partner. So again, that's not just saying we're here and we can deliver a variety of services. Actually, we've got 23,000 full-time equivalent workers across the VCSE sector, all with skills, all with experiences, all with a value and a role to play for the system. So actually we want to be part and parcel of the design and the delivery of services, and not just that afterthought where everything's decided elsewhere and then lastly they'll come to the VCS and say, what do you think? Because at that point nothing's going to really change. So we need to be there around the table as early as possible. And I think for the majority of the work that we're doing, like I say, we're stood in good stead with the system. I'm not going to read those, but these are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve through the collaborative. So something around that understanding, and that's not just the system, the NHS system understanding the VCSE sector. That's a huge part of it, but it's also the system understanding itself, the system understanding how it can connect to the sector understanding how it can connect to the system as well. Something in there around communications, and again, that's not one way. That's not just NHS turning around saying, here's a load of messages, read them, digest them, etc. That's about that two-way communication, and we need to be telling the system the value of the sector, what it's delivering, and what the outcomes that have been had. I've mentioned about the design and the delivery, and ultimately those 23,000 people, plus all the hundreds of volunteers that we've got across the sector, are all part of the one workforce that's part of the integrated care system as well. And ultimately, can't not put this on there, but if we're part of the design, part of the delivery, then actually we need to see that investment as well. And that's long-term investment. That's not just pounds and pence here and there through small grants. That's looking longer term and saying actually the sector has got a really key role to play in health and care support for our people. That needs to be part of the long-term planning, and ultimately the results needs to come with that as well. We've said a number of times to the system and many presentations that we do that it's a myth that the sector is free. So actually it needs to be resourced effectively to be able to deliver what it does. And then just final few things just in terms of what we've been doing over the last year and some of the outcomes that we've had. So most recently, we do have a memorandum of understanding that's just been agreed by the Integrated Care Board, which really sets out a set of principles and a set of responsibilities, how the system will work with the wider sector. And there's something about that memorandum of understanding in terms of place and how place sets itself up. And actually, that should be mirrored, replicated, tweaked and changed to suit what is happening at place as well. So yes, we've got one with the system, but that does need to come down now to place level. I feel we're pretty well integrated now into the system, and I know that the Humber and North Yorkshire have recently submitted their plan to NHS England for this year, and the VCSE sector is littered throughout there in terms of what it can do and what it can provide. Again, that's not the case in all places across the country. We do have a clear role to play. And we have started to bring that investment into the sector and out to the wider sector. There is certainly more to be done there, and how we do that and how we approach that needs to be developed. But ultimately, we've started to bring investment through and out to people on the ground working. We've got a number of pilots and programs set up. So, for argument's sake, the cardiology pilot is looking at how the VCSE sector can support waiting lists. And again, it's that having those conversations around supporting, in this case, people on waiting lists, and actually what can the VCSE sector to do to help. In terms of the workforce, we've got a Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic Leadership Programme, which again, there are hundreds of leadership programmes out there. Not all of those are accessible for whatever reason, or not taken up for whatever reason. So we want to unpick that and understand where are the challenges, where are the barriers, and what can we do to support our communities across Humber and North Yorkshire. We've got other pilots that are on there in terms of volunteering through the NHS responders, personalised care approaches in terms of how can the sector take advantage, support people in our communities to access personalised care, whether that be personalised healthcare budgets, or making sure that support is tailored around the needs of individuals. And then we're also looking at system pressures such as winter pressures, and obviously we had last winter Omicron in terms of a COVID variant, so there's a perfect storm about to hit all the hospitals. Again, what can the sector do to support people either away from those clinical settings to ease some of that pressure? And then we've also got green social prescribing, which is starting to have an effect now across the patch as well. So that slide probably could have been 2, 3, 4 slides in terms of the work that we've been doing across the collaborative. There is a lot of work going on, and there is certainly more to do, and interested in how we do that at place level and kind of moving through the 6 places and understanding from you guys in terms of how we and what we deliver in North Yorkshire. Contact details for anybody that does want to get in touch afterwards, and I'm sure these will all get circulated out as well, and I'm happy to have conversations in terms of how do we connect the VCSE sector up with the system and obviously the areas of work that we're doing. And at that point, I'm going to sit down and invite Jason up, who's going to take us through the next bit.
Okay, thank you, Gary. My name is Jason Stamp, and I have a very strange kind of hybrid career. So part of my life is spent as the chief officer of a infrastructure organisation called Forum that works across Hull and North East Lincolnshire. So I've got one foot in the voluntary sector. The other bit of my life, the past 10 years, has been spent within the NHS as a first-year non-exec director of the CCG and latterly chair for the remaining 9 days of the CCG lifespan. So I've always been really committed to how do we really start to maximise the opportunity for the voluntary sector in terms of health and social care? How do we start to kind of really think about creating new opportunities that move away from how we work today? So how do we get creative and innovative? How do we start to think about funding the voluntary sector in a different way? How do we move away from beauty contest commissioning, where it's the best tender that wins, and we start to think about the possibility of collaboration, partnerships, organisations coming together. So the whole work around integrated care systems kind of really follows that theme. So I've played this really well. So I get Gary to do all the dull slides, which include kind of acronyms and structures, and I get to talk a little bit around the opportunity that the integrated care system, Humber and North Yorkshire, presents for Place and for North Yorkshire. And I think what's really important is Gary's point earlier on is that for me in Hull, which is where I kind of live and work, I can talk about my place quite easily because it's a very, very defined place. It's quite a small place. Hull is an island of 44 square miles in the middle of the East Riding. So actually, my place doesn't have real complexity. When we start to talk about North Yorkshire, and having worked here for a period of time, actually the size and scale of North Yorkshire presents a challenge, but also I think a massive opportunity to think a little bit differently about place. Because I think I'd want you to think about North Yorkshire as being a collection of places forming a place. So what we need to think about from the North Yorkshire point of view is how we keep the uniqueness of what's happening in different areas and actually provide some very different mechanisms. So by virtue of how we work, North Yorkshire will need to look different to Hull, and that's a really good thing. So actually this, what I'm going to talk about, builds on what you have already, and just kind of thinking about the organisations in the room today for the start of this conversation, you are the right organisations. Because actually if I was building this from scratch, you are the people that I would want to be with me to build this from scratch. So I think this is about sharing with you some thoughts and ideas. I think the real work is around you as North Yorkshire, or your little unique, separate, wonderful bits, deciding how you want to work this. So I'm going to give you a broad overview of what the opportunity is. And certainly Gary has talked a lot about the big picture stuff, the system stuff, that really bizarre geography, which is North Yorkshire to North East Lincolnshire, Harrogate to Grimsby. It kind of feels as though it's a really uneasy kind of mix of places. But actually there's a massive opportunity to think about how this really showcases what you're doing already in North Yorkshire and starts to think about how that integrates in the way we've done at the system level into the work that's happening with North Yorkshire as a place. So let's see where we get to with this. It's a nice little picture of Jane Coulthorpe there. So 2 years ago, when we were setting up this VCSE collaborative, it felt like an impossible task. Because if you think about it, we were bringing together 6 infrastructure organisations from 6 different places with some of the sharpest elbows I've ever worked with. And let's face it, we'd always competed for each other's contracts. You know, we'd always kind of been interfering with each other's business. And actually, there was a real challenge as to how do we bring together the voluntary sector as a whole, as a collaborative at that system level, recognising that we were stronger together and that actually there were some things as a sector we could do once and do it well, but there was other stuff that we needed to do very separately. We need to reflect in how we worked. You know, a North Yorkshire way of working will need to be different to a Hull way of working. So it's been a really interesting 2 years. It's fair to say 2 years ago we were on the naughty step because we weren't really doing very much about the voluntary sector. 2 years down the line, thanks to Gary and the collaborative, we are now seen as the national leaders as to how to engage with the voluntary sector, and I think we're spending an awful lot of time helping other people do the business. but I think hopefully it gives us that really firm foundation. Stephen really gets the value of the sector. He really gets the fact that actually we need to put resource into the sector to get the sector to do stuff. So there's a very, very open door. So in lots of ways, I think the opportunity is there to be grabbed. I think there's no resistance in terms of what we could do as a sector. And that's just a picture of Jane, because it's quite a nice picture. You're wearing a different dress today. But very much, we've got a place lead for each of the 6 places. So Jane is your place lead. And actually, in terms of the work that we're talking about, this is about Jane as the convener, the facilitator, enabling the conversations to happen kind of locally, kind of looking at how resource can come down into the sector via Jane that's coming down from the system level. So very much this is about partnership and collaboration. And they're the key words that I think we use all the way through this is a new way of working, it's a different way of working. We're moving into a landscape by working together and being quite creative is going to give the outcomes that we want. So, this is how we connect the big picture stuff that Gary talked about with what's happening at place. So another reference to Jane, you're well referenced in these slides, Jane. So actually, in terms of the North Yorkshire kind of point of contact, that is Jane. But what sits around Jane is what you want to create as North Yorkshire. Jane's role is about providing the link between what's happening at that big system level and actually what's happening at place. So it's a two-way kind of role. So actually this is about when we have a conversation system around what could we do to get more people to use the NHS app, Jane's role is to go, right, in North Yorkshire we could do this. And then actually Jane's role is also to say, what's actually coming out of North Yorkshire is this, actually what do we do with that system level? So Jane is a key kind of contact point in the middle of this. The real focus, when we started to do this piece of work, people said to me, we really want the voluntary sector to involve because they're very good at engaging communities. And I went, yeah, I know we are, but I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about service delivery. I want to talk about the opportunity, the stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis that very often is not funded centrally, that we do on grants that last for a year or contracts that last for 3 years. Actually, I'll do this, but I really want to emphasise service delivery. And I think that's where the conversation is kind of heading. Because actually, in some ways, this is about service delivery in the future. Longer term funding opportunities. They'll still come from place, but CCGs won't be there. But actually, that figure, the 2.2 million Gary was talking about, that is funding that is coming down from that top tier system. So actually, we need to be really agile where the funding comes from in the future. Key principle behind this work is developing the sector as a trusted, confident and strong delivery partner. So not everybody knows what we do. So part of what we still have to do is explain what the voluntary sector is and isn't. But actually once people get it, we start to have conversations that say, what's the art of the possible? So Gary touched on the cardiology pilot, which was around patients on a cardiology waiting list. Excuse me. And that came from a meeting that I went to where a group of cardiology consultants said, voluntary sector, we've got a huge waiting list of patients with heart problems. What can you do about that? And I said we probably couldn't actually remove their hearts, but we could probably support them while they're waiting for you to remove their hearts. At which point the hospital went, should we have a conversation about how much that would cost? So actually some of this constantly is about saying, actually we need to sell the sector better. We need to kind of be quite agile in describing what we do, but also we are really quick to kind of think about the solutions that we could do together. So it really is kind of maximising that. And I would say after a fairly illustrious, 30-year career in the voluntary sector, my mother still thinks I work in a charity shop, but there you've got it. So what does it mean for North Yorkshire? So this really provides an opportunity to strengthen your voice and influence at a local level. And I know you do this already, and actually this isn't about starting from scratch. This isn't reinventing wheels. This actually provides a mechanism to build on what you have already and to think about where some of those gaps are. So actually, in some ways, this is business as usual. It really is about integrating you as a sector into place-based structures and those things that surround the place-based structures. Actually, I really want people to move away from the thought that if they're not sitting around the table, they're not involved. Because actually, we all know most of the work that really happens doesn't happen in the meeting. It happens outside the meeting and around the meeting. So actually it's about having some really trusted representatives who are sitting around those tables, who are able to communicate with the wider sector. And actually, it is about looking at where the sector is going to be most effective. Gary and I get invited to everything these days. And I tend to say no. When somebody asked me to be on a finance data performance review and something committee, it was like, really? Really? Does the voluntary sector need to be there? Probably not. We're going to talk a little bit around developing the concept of a VCSE assembly for North Yorkshire. And actually Gary's diagram kind of showed you how the idea is we will have an assembly structure in each of the 6 places, but actually very much how you design that assembly and actually how that assembly operates is up to you. But it provides a mechanism to bring together a group of sector organisations, a really diverse group, into one place to start to influence and drive what's happening at place, but also at system. Excuse me. It's also about developing a service delivery offer at a local level. And actually that, in the future, is likely to be about partnerships and collaboratives. So I talk a lot about mental health. Are there mental health organisations in the room? Let's pretend there were, okay? So mental health is a really interesting one, because all of the money we have in mental health, we invest in statutory mental health services. So we put all the big bit of money in those statutory mental health services. And we have huge waiting lists of people for statutory mental health services. And not all of those people need to be in that queue. So what we need to do is to shift those people out of the big queue, and actually we can do that by moving resource from those statutory services into the voluntary sector, this amazing stuff the voluntary sector does around low-level mental health and early intervention. Actually, it doesn't cost any more money, because we've just used our existing money differently. But actually what it does is develop that network of mental health organisations who can deliver services and deliver well. So that's the opportunity that this creates. The ethos for me is about transformation, and this is about new ways of thinking and working, and it's about new approaches to system problems. You know that if we carry on doing what we've always done, we'll get the same result. We're at a point now where the NHS is in crisis, social care is in crisis. There are outcomes for patients across the whole system, including North Yorkshire, are not what they might be, they're not what they could be. So actually the only way we're going to solve that is by doing something radically different. And what I know is the voluntary sector is the one part of this system that is able to think and work radically different. So there's a challenge there for you. And it really is about how we make sure there is participation, not only at that system level, the top tier stuff that Gary talked about, but also at the level of place. And actually how do we build on the participation that happens already. So James will talk a little bit more about VCSE Assembly for North Yorkshire a little bit later on. But I wanted to give you some thoughts around what the Assembly is to me, and basically this is the concept that I kind of, in a moment of idleness, I thought might be a good idea. So a really inclusive collaborative of VCS groups and organisations. So it doesn't replace those structures that you have already, it builds on them. And actually, it uses existing alliances as a foundation, but it needs to be able as an assembly to reflect not only geography, where you work, where you deliver services, but also key themes: mental health, learning disabilities, personalised care. So actually we bring together, we're able to kind of look at an assembly where we go, these are the people that work in Richmond, and alternatively, these are the people across North Yorkshire who are dealing with mental health. So actually we need to be quite sophisticated. The real trick with this is this can't just be the usual suspects. So actually how do we create an assembly that is inclusive to big organisations, but also some of those small community organisations? Because if there was one silver lining from COVID, it was knowing there is some amazing stuff happening at that community neighbourhood level that nobody pays for, nobody knows about, but actually if we really want to get the outcomes we want, we need to make sure they're included in this conversation. The whole thing around it is this assembly will support those emerging place-based structures in terms of North Yorkshire. So actually, whoever's sitting around that place-based table is able to say, we can go back to the sector and we can talk about those people dealing with fungal toenail infection in Harrogate. And actually that feels like it's different from where it is at the moment. As a sector, we have shown that we can respond quickly and creatively to service delivery opportunities as and when they arise. I would like to say we're moving away from an environment where everything is last minute, but this is the NHS and this is social care. So the ability to say, this is what we could do together, and actually to respond quickly to some of the challenge and the resource kind of coming down, we've got that skill. It's not a great place to start from, but actually we can respond far more quickly than the public sector. It will provide coordinated communication and engagement around the work of the Health and Care Partnership. There's a whole conversation for you to have about representation in new structures. And my starting point of representation is I think I'm really comfortable if it's the right people around the right table doing the right things. So, people say to me, Jason, would you like to be in our working group for end-of-life care? And I go, not really, I don't do end-of-life care, but I know somebody who does. That person is far better at being around that table, so how can we support that rather than me? And actually, we've got some limited ICS resource, and I say limited at the starting point, and it's slightly less limited when it comes to North Yorkshire, is that we do have some resource to help us start to design, develop and implement a VCSE assembly for North Yorkshire. So actually we're not doing that for free, so there is some resource that is available to kind of do that. This very much is a start of a conversation, so I think the whole thing around how you design, how you co-produce the assembly, how you organise the assembly, what it looks like, what the terms of reference might be, what the member of understanding is going to be between the sector at place and the place-based structures, that is all for you to do. I think this is about saying these are some of the things that you might want to think about. So how it will work, there's two examples here, so I'm not going to read this out because these are made up. But actually what we need is an assembly that is able to respond to the ICS, so this is the big structure stuff that Gary was saying, and very often we get phone calls, don't we, Gary, that go, we want to bring people together to talk about urgent emergency care. And we go, yeah, really? So actually we need to be able to come back to Jane in North Yorkshire and say, can you help us find some groups and organisations who can be part of this big conversation? In the same way that very locally, there'll be a conversation in the Health and Care Partnership that talks about autism services, autism support. How might we do it differently? So going back to the Assembly and saying, who are our members here who can be involved, the best placed people to be involved in that conversation. So the bigger Assembly we build, the Assembly will always be a fluid structure. So a member on day one doesn't mean that you'll be a member on day 50. You can choose to kind of move in and out of the Assembly as well. So the Assembly might be talking about something that's no interest to you, so you wouldn't be part of that. But there will be something that interests you, and you will be part of that conversation as well. So it will grow and build. Okay, here's some challenges for you. So for those of you who remember the last reorganisation of the NHS about 10 years ago, this maybe feels a little bit familiar. It maybe feel about a déjà vu. I remember doing lots of presentations 10 years ago where we talked about the opportunities for the voluntary sector. So it does feel as though I'm meeting myself coming backwards, and if you stand still in the NHS long enough, you do the same thing over again. So I would ask you to throw away some of that cynicism around the fact we've been here before, because actually I think the ICS arrangements and the Humber and North Yorkshire Partnership presents a whole new opportunity that wasn't there before. So I think the work that we've shown you that we've done at a system level to date, and Jane's been a really active partner in that, really demonstrates that A, they're serious about us, we're serious about them, and we can make a massive difference. If we can bring in 2.2 million in 1 year, what can we bring in next year? I think a lot of people say the new landscape is confusing, and it's another set of intentional acronyms, so I've got Gary to do those. I want you to like me. So the whole thing about the landscape, it is confusing, but it's as confusing as we want to make it. I think the bit about focusing on is around North Yorkshire, what that means, what you can do, and how does that influence what happens at the top. It does feel a bit like reinventing the wheel, but then wheels sometimes do need reinventing. Some people feel the opportunities of the VCSE are limited. I don't think they are. I think they're maximised by this opportunity. I think we have a seat at a table where we can go, this is the stuff that we could do. Actually, we can do this. Did you know we do this? Actually, we can go away and think about what we could do together. So I think the opportunities are there, and actually the resources there as well. We took Stephen Eames out on a visit to East Hull, one of the most deprived areas in Humber and North Yorkshire. And he met this project, and they'd done this most amazing piece of work for 3 years, because it was a 3-year contract. The contract had ended, hadn't been renewed. And they said to him, Stephen, we've stopped doing this piece of work. And he said, why? And they said, the contract ended. And he went, why do contracts last for 3 years? And they said, because they do. And he said, do they have to last for 3 years? And my response to Stephen was, that's in your gift, Stephen. Because actually, you could have longer contracts. You wouldn't have a 3-year contract, provide new hips for people, would you, and stop doing them. So actually there is an opportunity to really think about moving away from beauty contest commissioning, you know what I'm talking about, beauty contest commissioning, who writes the best tender, to think about commissioning alliances and collaboratives, organisations working together. The ability to kind of say, we have a group of people here, we want to fund in a different way. So actually that opportunity to really challenge some of those old ways of working is absolutely there for the giving. The governance is complicated, but governance has to be there, but governance be as complicated as you want to. So I'd encourage you to think about light governance, but you need to keep yourself safe. There's a massive need to balance between big and small. So when we have a conversation about mental health, I think mind, certainly for me in Hull, are really important, but they're not the only game in town. So how do we make sure that that mental health conversation includes Mrs. Jones's counselling group that actually is funded through a very, very small grant and not a contract? Because Mrs. Jones's counselling group has as much to contribute. They're part of the solution. Capacity and current pressures. I guess most of you, in signing up for today, probably thought, what am I not going to do by going to Bar Convent? And I bet some of you are now thinking, I wonder how many emails have popped into my inbox while I've been sitting here now. Okay? That's life. That's the reality in which we work. I think the big ask for Jane and the other VCS leaders was saying, in your very busy day jobs, we want you to commit some time to this. And actually people did, because I hope you recognise the value of what this work is about. I hope you recognise the opportunity. I hope you recognise that actually giving the time to do this piece of work is the future direction of travel. This actually is going to really change the way the sector kind of operates and the relationships we have. I really want people to think about not only what we do today and do very well, but what could we do tomorrow? Actually, where's the innovation and creativity we have as a sector? If somebody said to you, this is the problem, the solution you might come up with will be different to what you're doing today. That's what we all need to unlock. We need to unlock the potential of the sector. I'll leave you with this. So it's been about 30 years since I was in education. I have a degree in English, so I love a quote. Can't remember anything else apart from I love a quote. So a Chinese proverb, and I think this one is really, really key, and this is my challenge back to you as individual organisations. So when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. The choice you have is whether or not you're building today a wall or a windmill, because your VCSE assembly is your windmill. And actually, the whole conversation you have from here on in is about how you build a better windmill. Contact details, more than happy to have a conversation, and I think that's about it, Jane.
As Gary and Jason have outlined, it's now time for us to start thinking about a VCSE assembly for North Yorkshire. It's really, really important to say this is very much a starter for 10. This is a conversation and it's very much the beginning of a conversation, but we need to have it together and we need to be collaborative. So, you know, with that in mind, I'm going to give you a few thoughts that we've had so far. So we think that we need to develop the assembly and that it needs to be rooted in local places. We've seen how important place is to the ICS. It's also not passed you by that place is very important to the local government and everything that's happening around the local government review and the reorganisation that's happening there too. We've got all the local area committees, as you know, so it's how on earth do we make all of that work with what we're looking at here. So obviously we need to build on North Yorkshire as it is, but I would want us very much, and I know everybody else in the room will want us to build on the groups that already exist and the networks that already exist, rather than reinventing the wheel and rather than duplicating what's already there. It's really important. We know how busy everybody is and how little time everyone has. So in order to make sure that we're building on very firm foundations, we want to conduct some desktop research so that we really understand what's out there in North Yorkshire at the moment. There's been quite a lot of change in the last few years through the pandemic, and inevitably some organisations have grown and others have disappeared. So we need to get a snapshot of where we are in North Yorkshire at the moment, and we're going to need your help with that. It looks like we're going to have a little bit of time to do a bit of workshopping at the end of what I have to say, so I'm really keen to have some thoughts from you. But at any time, feed your thoughts in. So this, as I've said, is very much a broad outline of what we think the beginning of the process will be for our assemblies. Inevitably, these things are very much about a coalition of the willing, and it's up to you whether you want to get involved in your organisation, and there is an onus on the individual organisation to be party to the discussion. So I think that's important too. So for the sake of argument, we could take what were the local care partnerships and base our assemblies for North Yorkshire on that, or we might not. You know, these are very much a starter for 10. You know, do those feel like sensible areas for North Yorkshire, or do they not? But, you know, maybe we look at a sort of Harrogate, Hambleton and Richmond, an East Coast and a Vale and Selby approach. Or maybe you have other thoughts. But it's all up there for discussion. And, you know, it's important that you do get involved in that. What we do need to agree is how we're going to work together. So we need to agree on what our shared values and purpose is in terms of creating our assembly. Or assemblies. We need to be open and inclusive, and that's really important. It's open to everybody. There is nobody going to be excluded from this discussion. There will be a clear terms of reference and a code of conduct. Stephen and Jason and Gary have talked about a sort of parity of esteem of VCSE colleagues, and we need to ensure that all our connections and communications with each other and our meetings together are based on that. And at some point we'll get to the stage where we need to look at who represents the North Yorkshire level in the smaller assemblies, and in the thematic areas. So for the sake of argument, you know, we may say that in Scarborough and Whitby area that we had a group that was one of the assemblies contributing to the North Yorkshire Assembly, and it might have a thematic group on frailty and ageing, for the sake of argument. So those are the collaboratives and the thematic areas that we've talked about earlier. But it's all out there. So I'm hoping that you're beginning to see how you and your organisation might fit in. Hopefully that does help. In terms of communications, I think, again, we need to make sure it's open and two-way, and that's truly two-way. The onus isn't just on me and Community First Yorkshire to communicate with you, but it's also for you to talk to us and to take responsibility and find the information that you need. But what we will do is make sure that action notes and briefings from all the local meetings are accessible to members, and that will be beholden on the organisations that are involved in those local assemblies to drive that. So there is a commitment to each other to be inclusive and to share and to communicate with each other. Action notes of all the ICS level briefings will be openly available. Recently, as part of the VCSE Collaborative, we appointed a communications lead, and so all the information will go on the website, the ICS website. So it's up to you as organisations to go on the website and find that information, but we will endeavour to put links in our normal weekly e-news. So if you're not on e-news, get on it is basically the answer. Otherwise, you don't know what you might be missing in terms of what's going on with the broader ICS. There will be a completely inclusive feed-in of everybody's ideas. So, you know, talk, be part of it. I don't think any of you need any encouragement to talk, but, you know, it's really important to be inclusive and to allow everybody to have their say. I think that's absolutely essential. So I hope you can see that this is a really exciting time for us all. It seems like we've got nothing but exciting times, or whatever else you want to posit it at. But it's challenging, but there is an awful lot of opportunity out there for us as a sector. And wouldn't it be absolutely fantastic if we could really seize the day on this and make it work, particularly in a region that is as vast and unusual as North Yorkshire is. Worth remembering that both Sue Symington, who is the chair designate of Humber and North Yorkshire ICS, lives in our region. She lives in Harrogate, and so does Stephen. He lives in Thirsk. So they really do understand North Yorkshire, and they also understand the BCSE sector. So we've got their commitment to our involvement as well. So for me, I think that's really powerful. Right, who'd like to go first? Go for it, Helen.
Yeah. What kind of timescale do you have on setting up the assembly?
I don't think there's any firm timescale.
No, I mean, when's it going to be up? When do you want it to be up?
I think it will depend on how much we can get done over the summer in terms of the desktop research, because I think we need to do the research first, and from the research we can then bring people together. But it would be also very useful to have an indication of how the sector feels that the assemblies in North Yorkshire need to be in terms of their locations. In my fairly vague and geographically dyslexic mind, I can see a whole North Yorkshire assembly with other assemblies underneath that, because with the best will in the world, you can't do the whole of North Yorkshire in a wanna. And anyone who's tried it has sort of worn out their tyres and probably everything else. But I would hope to be come September for us to be able to be having some other conversations about what it's going to look like in North Yorkshire. But it's really important to have those conversations. And a couple of people, including you, thanks for that, Helen, have said come and talk to us and come and see us as an organisation, and I'm really keen to do that too, because it's only by understanding your organisation, what you do, what you deliver on the ground, that we get a real picture for what the VCSE looks like in North Yorkshire, because there has been a lot of change. Okay, thank you. Next question.
Well, I would say, just in response to that, so I would say the approach that Jane's talking about in terms of that desktop bit about what exists already, I think is probably really important, because I think you probably have the makings of an assembly. So actually how the assembly works is probably less complicated than if you were starting from scratch. And I think the bit that will take your time are all the very dull mechanics around terms of reference and all that type of stuff, but those things have to kind of be in place. So in some ways the energy is probably around the setting up and the governance, and probably less around who wants to be part of the assembly. What I would say is that you'll never get it perfect, that actually it continues to evolve. So having a starting position and then building on it is probably the way to approach it. And actually it's one of those, if you build it, people will come, because there'll be some skeptics on day one who won't join, but actually as it kind of rolls, we'll go, yeah, maybe I'll give this a chance. So actually part of this is almost having that core membership to kind of start with and think about how you do it. The other bit is I think if you do that research bit, inevitably, it's fair to say, Gary, at some point there will be a request from the ICB that goes, we've got a pot of money here, we need to do this particular piece of work, we need to be able to go back to all 6 places and say, who does this particular piece of work? So some of that local knowledge will enable that to happen quite quickly. In an ideal world, your assembly would be the place you would take it, but if the assembly is not fully formed, some of this will be the local knowledge that says, these are the people we need to involve in it. So I would expect everything to be functional probably by March next year, which is when the first part of money kind of runs out. But I think from then on in, I think very much it will gather momentum. It probably won't take as long as you think it does. Fair to say, from experience.
Claire.
Just leading on from that a little bit, Jason, you gave me a real good feed in there, and I want us to be friends, so it's set in that context. One of the things that you said when you were talking earlier is around that you're not just wanting it to be the usual suspects. Whilst I know you didn't mean it in this way, I think the usual suspects are pivotal to the development of this, because we would be classed as a usual suspect, and often I think we're misunderstood. Usual suspects bring forward all of the ground level grassroots, yeah, and we still are grassroots, really, even though we're classed as slightly bigger usual suspects. Super important because we're your core.
And with absolute love, as a usual suspect myself. So, and I think you can't deliver this without your usual suspects. So if we replace usual suspects with tried and tested.
Oh, I'm loving that language.
Okay, tried and tested. So part of this is the foundation of this is about those tried and tested, because actually those organisations are really important. They're already kind of delivering. What the model's about is what we add to the tried and tested. So the untested and new, should we call them? So actually, how do we join up what you do with what other people are doing to create a super offer? And actually, how does your skill and expertise enable other organisations to kind of develop? So it isn't about casting them out. It's about saying if the future is about collaboration and partnership. And it's interesting. So the mental health work stream that we have in Humber and North Yorkshire, the face around every single table tends to be Hull and East Yorkshire Mind, my local mind. I love them. The chief exec's a really good friend of mine. She came to me and she went, I'm a bit bored really being on every single committee. Why do they keep asking us? And I said, because you're the only organisation they know. And I said, have you thought about saying no? And she said, well, my problem is if I say no, there's not going to be around the table because I don't know who else could do this. So the piece of work we've done around mental health has been saying, actually in terms of all those seats around tables, who else is delivering some stuff that enables it? Because she was saying, I don't really want to lead. I'm spending all my time in bloody partnership meetings and nobody's doing the day job. So how do we do it? So I do think usual suspects are important. I also think sometimes from the point of view of some of the people we're talking about, usual suspects become a really lazy way of engaging with the voluntary sector. And part of what we need to unpick is there's the tried and testeds, our old favourites, but actually there's some new runners and riders over here. I'm using racing metaphor because we're in racing country. So please don't feel that I'm kind of throwing you out of the door. I'm inviting you in, I'm stroking you, and I'm giving you loads and loads of love.
You can stop that, Jason.
Just on the mind example as well, there is something around mind can sit around the table and take in all the information and provide that perspective, which is great. But actually, how do we get that information then back out to the sector? And whether that's mind or whether it's a untested and new organisation, we do have to work through that whole how do we get the messages back out to the sector and feed into the different groups as well, so that there is that wider perspective. And that's a piece of work that we've been doing in some areas, in some themes rather, but obviously it needs to go further and further as we move through the years in all the different themes that we're going to work in.
Thanks very much. Any more questions? It's not like everyone... Elizabeth.
Hi, you said you came to Scarborough to speak about this. Who were you speaking with at Scarborough?
So the Scarborough meeting was a bit ad hoc. Effectively what it was is Stephen Eames had a meeting with a councillor in Scarborough in his diary. But because we've been talking to him a lot about VCSE sector, ultimately he wanted to use his time wisely. So he turned around to us and said, I want to unpick what it actually looks like and feels like in Scarborough beyond the statistics. Because we've all got our computers and we can all reel off all the statistics in the world as to how it is in Scarborough. So he wanted to come to us and do that. So it just happened to be that we've got a couple of projects over there that we are aware of in terms of Educare, in terms of a physical activity project that is taking shape over there. So it was just a quick whip round of emails a week in advance of this meeting to say, actually, who's around that we can have this conversation so that we can tell and show Stephen what it really looks like. That was a one-off, but actually Stephen coming out and meeting different places and different VCSE organisations. We've got several dates in the diary already across different places where Stephen and Sue and potentially other colleagues across Humber and North Yorkshire are going to come out and have those conversations as well, because ultimately they don't just want to talk about the VCSE as being valuable, they want to go and see it and they want to kind of come and visit as well. So.
Just seems like a bit of a missed opportunity, because we could have grabbed the leaders group for the VCSE and on Met, and then you'd have had a wide range of VCS leaders and opportunities there if we'd have known about it.
I mean, it's not the only opportunity. So I would say that very much was about Stephen thinking on his feet and thinking, I've got a day in Scarborough, what should I do? Should I go and have an ice cream on the front and some chips, or should I meet some organisations? We are planning with Jane a visit for Sue and Stephen to North Yorkshire. In my head, I think they understand that trying to do North Yorkshire in a day is probably absolutely exhausting. So we might want to think a little bit differently about that visit, in terms of we might want to think thematically, we might want to think geographically, and that's for Jane and Gary to kind of think about. I think Stephen's approach of working, and actually what's really interesting is when he did that video, Gary and I said, should we give him a script? Should we write something down for him to say? And we never got around to doing it, did we? And this video arrived. So that was all Stephen's kind of thinking. So actually we haven't prompted that, which actually is really reassuring, because without us telling him, he says some really positive stuff. I think for Stephen, and certainly Sue as well, that ongoing kind of going out and visiting and saying, I'm going to be here on this particular day, I'm quite interested to see what's kind of happening, I think is a massive opportunity. I think it's not the only opportunity. I think there is something around thinking wisely and well around what you want to do with that North Yorkshire time. And actually, it's easy for them to do Hull in a day, and I was very focused in Hull on, let's go to the most deprived area and projects that we know aren't being funded, that are going to fall off a cliff edge. Let's kind of really make him feel sad because there's crying children and all that type of stuff. So, but you might want to think about how you want to use his time in North Yorkshire to your best advantage, and I think the leaders group would be a really good point to say, what might that programme look like?
Natasha.
Hi. Well, I guess just in terms of, we have a question that how would the VCSE assembly work, and actually there were some common themes in terms of what you've been saying around communication channel being a really key. Communication channel is really important. We also talked about the outputs of the desktop research being critical in terms of shaping what this assembly is doing and how it's doing it. And we talked about geography and how everywhere is so different that actually we definitely need the voice of everyone coming through in that. I just had a separate question just around the work streams that you mentioned earlier on. How are those work streams formed, and do you see the VCSE assembly being able to feed into what work streams are being created and worked on?
I think for the work streams, some of how they were formed was when I first started working with the Willing in terms of the ICS, so I got involved in mental health, for argument's sake. That quickly evolved into community mental health transformation. So some of the work areas have been just where time has taken us. Some of the work areas have been around, I'm involved in system planning, and with all the other directors across the system, actually what's going on in their world, in their work, and actually where can we plug the VCSE in, so that then sets up. But I think there's also the proactive nature that we need to look at as well. So winter pressures, for argument's sake, that was up on one of the screens, that was a conversation in a room in winter in reality, and it was what could the VCSE set to do when we put something together quite quickly to do winter. But actually there's something about looking ahead and going, well actually what are the work streams that we want to start developing? So cost of living is it's happening, let alone on the horizon. Obviously fuel poverty, and as we go into winter it's going to really crunch. So actually we can start working now and looking forward as to what are the future work streams we need to get involved in. But I think the limiting factor in some respects is capacity, as everybody will know. There's probably several other work streams that we could and should be involved in, and we will do over time, but it is just that kind of prioritisation of where time takes us at the minute.
And I guess just really quickly, and I guess there's two sets of kind of work streams, one of which is the ICS driven work stream. So the ICS says this is a priority for us, we want the VCS to be involved. So workforce, which I'm also senior responsible officer for, is a really important one, because actually workforce is the common problem that sticks everybody together. So we all have issues with workforce. So actually what's that movement towards one workforce? Actually, how does our workforce in our sector move really easily into other roles? But how do we also make sure that we can recruit into other roles? So there's those high level ones. The other ones we determine ourselves are very much based on what's happening in communities. So volunteering is a key one. We need a common volunteering strategy across the whole of this partnership, and that includes hospital trusts and the VCS. And the VCS needs to lead that and drive that. There is some stuff, there'll be some stuff around health inequalities, because that actually is massive. And if you think about North Yorkshire, you think about Scarborough in particular and the health inequalities in Scarborough, that is equivalent to the health inequalities that I'm experiencing in Hull. And being really honest, based on the whole figures of health inequalities, make the most of me. I've got 3 years left and then I'm going to be dead. So the whole bit around this is about saying we will drive some stuff ourselves, which will be influenced by your assembly. The other bit is we may come out to people and say, in terms of this developing this volunteering strategy, who is best placed from North Yorkshire to help us with that piece of work? It might not be Jane, but actually it might be one of you who actually really wants to commit some of that time from a North Yorkshire perspective, making sure this really reflects some of those challenges around rural volunteering, the fact that you can't just walk around the corner, that actually, you know, how do you develop a different offer that might be around digital and recognising some of the digital limitations. So there's two elements to them. I think the offer would be, and I go back to, I think I said it before, the right people around the right tables doing the right things. I am not the right person for everything, but actually people in this room are the right people to do the things that we want to support people to do. Did you have another question? You were poised, weren't you?
You read my mind. It was about the one workforce, which I absolutely love the ethos of that. But actually what would be really valuable is sharing insights in relation to recruitment challenges, and if there's an opportunity to actually, you know, bring that together in terms of supporting each other on how we can...
And I think, and Jane loves the workforce stuff as much as I do, but so there's something about what we contribute to that wider workforce piece. There's something around our workforce being part of a conversation about one workforce. And actually we are better at some things than the public sector, so we can recruit and appoint in 6 weeks. It takes the public sector 3 months to doing the same things. Why? I don't know. The other bit, and I think this is a challenge for us as a sector, is there's an absence of workforce data. So actually we don't really talk about workforce very much. We don't actually gather data that says this is what our workforce looks like, these are the skills and qualifications of our workforce. I don't know about you, I'm really struggling to recruit at the minute. But actually, where is the conversation as a sector where we go, have we thought about secondment? Have we thought about stealing something from somebody else for 6 months and paying for them? Actually, that's the thinking. And actually, every time we've got a vacancy, how many times do we go, do we really need that? If I'm going to be saying to hospitals, I want you to kind of not replace a nurse with a nurse, but to go, we could do with a physiotherapist, then we need to do that as a sector. So there is a conversation, I think, about as a sector, about understanding our workforce better. Because I sit in meetings and I go, oh, the voluntary sector workforce, and I'm dreading somebody going, who do you mean? Because I don't know who I mean. But luckily, I say it with such confidence that people go, yes, that's great. For now, anyway. So, but I think the workforce piece, I think if you really want to get excited and mobilise something where we can bring real change and difference, because our future workforce, I'll stop this in a minute, but our future workforce is not just doctors and nurses. Our future workforce is the people who answer the phones, push the trolleys, make things happen. They're electricians, they're plumbers, they're people who kind of, you know, console people when they're coming through the door, they're security guards. Those people are our communities, and actually how we open opportunities to our communities, which is the ethos of what we do, and change the dial on workforce, is in our gift, and that's the bit we need to unlock. That's enough about workforce.
Now look what you started. Okay, time for one more question, if anyone has one.
I think we
Okay.
had to
Oh, go on, Amy.
Sorry. Yeah, just with the work streams, is that going to be the sole way for organisations to get health contracts? And is that going to be the people at the assembly will have a think and say, oh, this organisation would be able to do that, or are organisations going to be able to apply?
So we want to really encourage local health and care partnerships to see the assembly as an asset. So future commissioning might be in lots of different ways. So future commissioning might be around saying, we're still going to compete for a contract. Future commissioning might be about saying to an assembly, we really need to do this, who around the table could do this, how do we kind of make it easy for people to come together, commissioning a collaborative. So in lots of ways, the collaborative won't be the assembly won't be the only way, but actually the assembly will be the key touch point, the point of contact. Jane and I were talking a little bit around, if you get an assembly model right, and I'm being very mindful in front of Gary that the money we are putting into this is around health and social care. But if you had a model that might do other things as well, which might do regeneration and might do other bits, and you've got a model that really works, then actually that whole relationship with the people who are going to be commissioning, there's a way to do that through an assembly which is quicker, easier, simpler, and actually that's the real sell that we have. So actually in some ways there will still be beauty contest commissioning for some things, but actually the gift that commissioners have, because we won't have commissioning as we know it moving forward, you'll have these collaboratives. Engagement with these collaboratives is really important. So the mental health conversation will happen in mental health. How we support people in and out of hospital will happen in acute. We need to be part of that conversation. So I think it's better to be in than out. And actually, in some ways, and I go back to that bit around fluid assembly. So you might not go to every single meeting because it might not be relevant, but actually if you're getting the right communications, you know on Tuesday we're talking about fungal toenail infection in Richmond, so I'm going to go to that one. I'm sorry, I'm so obsessed with fungal toenail infection because it's unpleasant, but and nobody delivers services around fungal toenail. So that's a gap. There's a gap. There's a voluntary sector gap in fungal toenail infection. So if you want to think about, take it away. Happy to fund it.
I can't possibly top that. So on leaving you on the fungal toenail infection theme, I suppose, I just wanted to say we've run over very slightly. I wanted to give everybody time to ask questions. But thank you very much indeed for taking time out of your days. I know how precious your time is. Do remain engaged in the discussions here. But can you express your thanks to Gary and Jason for supporting